All right, welcome to today's podcast. Before we jump into it, if you are somebody that's struggling with grief right now, maybe it's, been a year or two or three, or in my case, 30 years since you lost somebody, and it still shows up every now and again, and it gets a little sticky, a little tough to process it. We want to offer some relief from your grief, and all I'm going to tell you now is that at the very end of today's podcast, we're going to sit down with Teresa and have a conversation about the event that we've got planned on October 14th in Scottsdale. It's going to be an incredible day. More on that after today's podcast with Romy. Cannot wait for this one. She's such a good seed. So, all right. First, a quick word from our resource partners and a reminder that you'll find links to every one of these folks at learnfrompeoplewholiveit.com. You just click the resources tab and look at that. So almost every week of my life for the last 2 years, somebody will ask me about the retreat that changed my life. And I'm so proud to present Spirit Quest as one of our official resource partners. Founded in 2007, it's the holistic wellness center that changed my life, helped me overcome anxiety, helped me work through conflict, gave me all these tools to manage stress, and they would love to do the same thing for you. To connect to Spirit Quest, click the link on our resources tab at learnfrompeoplewholiveit.com, and when you get on the phone with them, make sure you mention that you heard it on Learn From People Who Lived It. You've probably heard me say this before, but most of the things that kill us are preventable, and that's exactly why I put my heart in his hands, in his care. I'm talking about Dr. Robert Todd Hurst and HealthSpan MD. He's my cardiologist because I appreciate his holistic approach to heart health. There's nothing out there like HealthSpan MD. His AFib reversal program, his CAD reversal program. Get the link on the resources page at learnfrompeoplewholiveit.com. At Metal Joe, they sell more than shirts. They sell apparel with a purpose. In fact, my favorite hoodie in my closet is a Mental Joe hoodie. They help out G.I. Joes to the average Joe's one t-shirt at a time. With every purchase, you help them support organizations that can provide services to help others get out of their heads and into their bodies through plant medicines, equine therapy, yoga, and other non-traditional mental health treatments. Link to them, pick out your favorite t-shirt or hoodie right now at learnfrompeoplewholiveit.com/resources. One of our proud resource partners is Eric's House. Here's the deal. Nothing quite prepares us for the heartache of a profound loss. And grief isn't a problem to be fixed, but rather a normal reaction to loss. So when somebody you love dies, it might feel like everything you once knew as true has changed. When we experience that loss, especially the ones that are really unexpected, like suicide or addiction, grief is complicated. That's where the community at Eric's House comes in. Link to them on the resources page at learnfrompeoplewholiveit.com.
Looking for no bullshit conversation about mental health? Find Learn From People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It.
Hi, I'm Romy, and I am 59 years old.
Hi, Romy. What story are you here to share today?
I'm here to share my 9-year journey with stage 4 colon cancer.
Who do you hope hears this?
I think with the statistics the way they are today, that 1 in 2.5 people are going to be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime, pretty much anyone, but most specifically people that are newly diagnosed.
Yeah, because I can imagine how incredibly scary all of that is. And we're going to jump into all of that today. I want to welcome everybody to another episode of Learn From People Who Lived It. All the way on the right is one of our favorites, Dr. Frank Bavacqua. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, very good, man. Do you have, is there cancer in your family? Like, have you gone through this journey with a loved one before, Frank?
I'm one of the few lucky people that cancer has definitely been in and around the family, but I can't think of anyone super close that we lost specifically because of cancer. So yeah. I might be the odd one out here in a really lucky way.
I'm really looking forward to it, and not for the best reason at all, Romy, but my best friend in the whole world has colorectal cancer. And, it's gone to stage 4, and his treatment options have kind of weaned down to almost nothing. And he's actually in a trial right now out on the East Coast to try to find some way to, stop this thing from going off the rails. And so I'm actually really going to be listening intently today to figure out what I might be able to do as one of those outsiders, looking in, because it's got to be one thing to be the person going through it. But what we also should recognize is that for the people around that person, it's difficult for them too. They often just don't know what to do. And I'm kind of hoping that you shed some light on that for us today. So first and foremost, welcome to our podcast. How are you feeling right now as we get ready to dive into this?
I feel great.
Yeah, I can imagine you do.
Yeah.
I can imagine you do. So typically we start with people 0 to 10, and we kind of get a little bit of a lens into what their childhood was like. So I know we're going to spend most of our time talking about your cancer diagnosis and those things, but what was 0 to 10 like for you?
So I had an amazing childhood. There's just not one thing that I would look back and say, I wish it was different. I grew up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the era where we played outside until the street lights came on. I had a brother and a sister. I'd say 70% of my day was playing in the woods. And then at age 4, my mom put my sister and I into a dance/acrobat class, and I became a competitive gymnast for the next 12 years.
What was your specialty?
So everybody asks that. And when you are a competitive gymnast, you do all 4 events. Like you don't have a specialty, you have to do all 4.
So what is all 4? Hit me with that. Got the horse thing? What we got the horse thing?
That's the vault.
The ring thing?
Okay, now you're in boys gymnastics.
Oh,
so
boy.
Girls gymnastics is the uneven parallel bars, the vault,
the floor,
and balance beam.
And the balance beam. That's incredible because Frank, can you even walk across a balance beam without falling off?
I can't even touch my toes, so we can just start somewhere different. Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing that's really evident to me as you talk about your childhood is that you needed that childhood to be really, really great because you were getting ready to face some serious things later in life. And cancer's hard enough when things are humming and going well and you've got support and good family members. It's next level difficult if some of that stuff isn't so sound in your life. And so let's jump ahead. Let's jump ahead to the cancer diagnosis and kind of dive right in. Can you help us to understand what's happening maybe 3 to 6 months out of this diagnosis?
Oh my gosh. 3 to 6 months out was a haze because in my particular story, I was originally diagnosed stage 2. And I was told that I just needed surgery and I was not going to need chemo or any further treatment. And this was a blip in the radar, and the rest of my life was just going to hum along the way that it always did. But as they were wheeling me into surgery for my very first surgery, I had had a PET scan a couple of days before that. And the doctor, my surgeon, said, there was a little spot on your PET scan. I'm not worried about it, but once you recover, you need to have an MRI. And so that 3 to 6 month time period just was chaos because I got the MRI about 6 weeks after the surgery, and there was a spot in my liver and they didn't like the way that it looked. And so I was facing another surgery. And then things really kind of fell off the rails after that.
What does that mean, fall off the rails?
Well, so I had the liver surgery and the pathology came back that it was a metastases from the colon cancer. And I was going to have to get chemo and get the oncologist. And all of a sudden now I was a real cancer patient, where before I was like, this is just a little nuisance. I'm going to be laid up for a minute or two. And so when I went to the oncologist, they do pathology, and they did this test that showed what are your chances that this is going to recur. And mine was really low, the number from the pathology. So I was looking at the oncologist and I was like, well, then why do I need chemo? You got the cancer out of the colon, you got the cancer out of the liver. all of my lymph nodes came back negative. And I was like, I'm not sure I want to do that. And I said, I need to get another CT scan. And he said, no, you don't. We're just going to start the normal regimen of chemo. You do not need a CT scan. And him and I bantered back and forth for 20 minutes. And he finally knew that I wasn't going to back down. And so I got the CT scan and I went to the follow-up appointment. And in my head, I thought, it's been 10 days. Nobody's called me, so it must be fine, because they always call you if something bad's going on. And the minute that doctor walked in the treatment room, it was written all over his face. He didn't need to say anything. He looked like he was ready to pass out. And my husband at the time, who was now my ex-husband, was with me. And these two men, both of them just looked like they were going to faint. And I don't even have a diagnosis, but he finally said, the cancer has spread to your peritoneal cavity. And unfortunately, there's no real treatment that we have for that. And it's chemo for life, and the chemo won't work forever. And do you want to know how much longer you have? And at that moment, I think your brain just completely short circuits, because you can't comprehend what anyone is saying. And so the doctor honestly was in worse condition than I was. My ex-husband, I thought I was going to have to pick him up off of the floor. So I didn't really have time to freak out in that second. And I said, no, I don't need to know how much longer I have. And I was like, let me just think about this. And we got up and just hightailed it out of there, because I just needed to get out of that room.
What is the next 24 hours like after you get that diagnosis?
So my husband and I went to a park, and we just both sobbed for, I don't know, an hour and a half. I mean, it was just so shocking. And at the time I had an 8th grader, a 10th grader, and an 11th grader.
Wow.
And I might add that I felt completely normal. Like, I felt completely exactly the same as I did the day before that I heard you have colon cancer. So it was even harder to comprehend, because I felt fine. I was acting fine. Like nothing had changed. One day I was fine. The next day, a doctor is telling me what I knew was probably that I had a year and a half to live. So I think I blacked out. To be honest. Sure. I think I blacked out. I don't remember much after sitting at the park.
Frank, anything from you? And then I've got a couple of questions.
No, I think I would have blacked out too. I think that's actually a really normal response to, like, I mean, I even think back to, years ago when my sister called me to tell me that, like, our grandma had died. And, like, initially it doesn't set in. It, like, all of the emotions are not there immediately. Like even the intellectual comprehension, like, it's not there immediately. And then somewhere a little later on, then it kind of hits you, and then it sets in. But yeah, that's a pretty normal response.
All right. So Doc, I'm going to hit you with a question, then I'm going to go back to Romy. And so I want to know, from the psychologist's point of view, obviously there's no right way to take in this information, digest this information, process this information. But what are some decent best practices, and I'm throwing that in air quotes, for somebody who gets, real tough news like this? And it very much could be exactly what she did. But do you have a thought or opinion on taking in really tough news and how people might do that? I don't think the word is better, but differently.
I mean, I feel like the range of possible responses is almost infinite at that point, right? Like, you can kind of dive into, just online research and trying to find the most obscure article or experimental treatment out there, right? Not sleep for 3 days because you're just Googling, all the way to some other extreme where may as well go skydiving tomorrow, and just, kind of live whatever. Like, the range of responses in that kind of immediate aftermath, I think is this podcast is not long enough to talk about all of those things. Yeah. And then I think somewhere down the road, you start to kind of assess like, all right, what am I really going to do here? And I'm guessing that happened for you too.
Oh, it did. It was about the 48-hour mark. Mm-hmm. So given that my kids were the ages that they were, I knew right from the beginning, I didn't even have to think about it, that I was not going to alter their lives in this crucial time of development. And so I was going to act as normal as possible. So for that first 48 hours, I think I did freak out completely. Like I felt it in my body. You probably couldn't have seen it if you were, just looking at me. And then at the 48-hour mark, I started researching, and I researched and I found a colon cancer group. And I found that there were certain centers in the US that did treat what I had. And one of them was UCSD. And so I eventually made an appointment, and UCSD became my primary doctor, surgeon, and oncologist. And that's where I've gotten treated ever since. There's so much behind that, but they really are the reason that I'm still here today.
Well, I think you have something to do with that too. Here's the question. Yeah. Here's the question. And I don't know that you did this, but I want to talk about this. You said that for 48 hours, and then you mentioned like, I just wanted things to be as normal as possible for my kids. Were you the kind of person who let everybody in your inner circle know what was going on? Because I'll tell you that my experience with folks who have cancer is that they want to kind of just keep it quiet. They don't want anybody to know. They don't want anybody to understand what's going on. So which side of the balance beam did you fall on?
I was private to an extreme.
You were?
I didn't share my story or even begin to share it until I was at the 5-year mark. So my super close circle, and that's a handful of people, knew what was going on, but nobody else knew. I was like an actress. Nobody at work knew. People would hear bits and pieces, but nobody really knew. And there were a couple of reasons I did that. I didn't want that to be the focal point of my life. Number one, I didn't want to run into somebody in the grocery store and have them look at me and go, "Oh my gosh, how are you?" I wanted everything to be completely normal. And I wanted it to be normal for my kids. And it was the same reason when my kids were little that I quit watching Dateline, because I would, watch these horror stories, and that's all I could think about because it was just in my ear. So I had to just get rid of the noise.
I want the psychologist point of view on people who decide to share versus those who keep it privately. And I know it's different strokes for different folks, and everybody's got to do them. But it would seem like there are, to me, as the outsider, more benefits to letting people know so that you can receive more support. But then I also understand, because I see this through my own best friend's eyes, of like, I just want to be normal. Like, I just don't want to talk about cancer all the time. I don't want it to be the theme of my life. Like, I'm more than just this thing. And so what do you have to say about that, Frank?
Well, I got two questions. One's a quick and easy one. If you rewound back to that same time, would you do things exactly the same way?
100%.
Okay. And I can see the benefits to doing that, right? And you kind of laid it out, right? Like you don't want to be it, right? Like the question though is, did that become exhausting at some point to hide it, to act like everything was fine?
Nope, never. And so everybody's cancer journey is so incredibly different. And I never felt sick. I was fine. So it was easy for me to be normal.
It wasn't a stretch. Right.
It wasn't. I mean, I did chemo when I felt shitty during that time period. And as far as work, the people I reported to knew what was going on, and they were fantastic. They scheduled things around me so that during, a chemo week, we weren't doing an in-person meeting in Chicago. So I had a ton of support, but it was just from my close-knit people.
Yeah.
I just didn't need support from
like
somebody
you said, the girl at the grocery store, right?
Yeah.
From somebody that I knew from the pickup line at my kids' elementary school. I just I'm not one of those people. And I think everybody handles it differently.
How did your kids handle it? Sorry, Frank.
My kids, so of course, 3 kids are going to handle it 3 completely different ways.
Okay.
And my middle son, I'm not even sure if I asked him today, he would really know what was going on. He was just in his own world. He was a huge hockey player, so he was traveling. And my oldest daughter, I think she kind of just blocked it out. And then my youngest one is the one that needed to always know what was going on. She needed to be at the hospital during surgeries, and she needed to know what was happening to feel good. The other 2 were like, the less information, the better. And I picked up on it super quick and just kind of treated them the way they needed to be treated.
What were you going to say, Frank? Sorry.
This whole story has kind of shed light on how differently everybody wants to kind of go through this process. I think, Mathew, when you and I have seen troubles kind of occur in other people's stories, it's usually because there's not some level of communication or insight into like what a given person wants or needs. And maybe they shy away from having those conversations at all. And so somewhere along the way, someone's needs are not being met, whether it's the person going through the thing or the support people around. Romy, in your case, it sounds like whether things were explicitly stated or not, one, you really kind of controlled the narrative from the beginning, and that was important for you. But the people around you, whether they explicitly stated it or not, they gave you hints as to what they wanted or needed. And it sounds like you were able to give them as much or as little of that as you could. And part of that is probably not in small part due to the fact that you weren't feeling crappy, right? Physically, you weren't feeling crappy, which probably made it at least a little bit easier to handle some of that stuff. If you're just down and out 5 or 6 days out of every 7, like that's probably going to be a whole lot harder. But all the stars may be aligned in this case.
And you're exactly right. There was at one point during this, and I want to say we were 7 years in, that I had a bowel obstruction, and it was a side effect from the treatment. It wasn't directly cancer related, but that was the first point where I felt pain like I have never felt pain before. And it was months until anyone would agree to do surgery, because I had so many abdominal surgeries. And so they were just being really cautious. And I will tell you, my personality changed of 3 months of being in excruciating pain. It was like, I just couldn't be the happy-go-lucky 24/7 person, but I tried. Like if you ask you ask my youngest daughter today about that time period, she was mad. She was really angry at me. And it was because it was the first time she saw me not acting normal. And she was scared.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, because you're mom, it kind of falls to you to make your kids feel better, even when you can't even make yourself feel better.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. You mentioned in your storytelling that you're not with that gentleman anymore, and I'm not going to ask you to, go into like super details about all of that, but did that relationship end as a part of some awakening during your, what I would call new mindset around I'm on borrowed time. Apparently, I've only got so and so to live. Like, am I really doing everything I want to be doing? Is it time to make changes in my life? Or am I reading into this too much?
No, you're not reading into it at all. I would say we'd probably need a whole nother podcast to delve into the, nitty gritty of that. But I think when you're going through something like this, and it could be anything, it could be cancer, it could be the loss of a child, it could be a number of things. I think that with you and a spouse, there's one person that's trying to keep everything normal, and then there's another person that's freaking out. I think it's really hard for both people to deal with such a serious situation year over year equally. And so with my ex-husband, he really wanted to pretend that this was not going on. And I think it exposes cracks. It exposes cracks that were there all along, and it just magnifies them. And so we got separated. I was diagnosed in 2014. We got separated 3 years after, divorced a year after that. And I did go through a process of awakening. And, it kind of was that theory, I'm never going to get better in the environment in which I got sick. So I need to start making changes. And I think for him and I, nothing really happened. We were married for 20 some years, 22 years, I think. We just grew at different rates. And so had the cancer not shown itself, I think we would have had the same outcome. It just might have been 5 or 10 years later.
Let's talk about mindset, because this is really fascinating. And you have an opportunity that not a lot of people have had. But, well, let's scrap that. Loads of people have had cancer before, but not all of us. And we've talked to, dozens and dozens of people that have gone through the cancer situation. And the one common thread that I've noticed over my lifetime is that they all seem to use this sentence: I was lucky to get the cancer because it opened my eyes to all of these things. And so I'm not going to ask you to say that you were lucky, but do you feel like you got it and are a different and potentially better person post?
100%.
Really? Okay, explain that.
100%. I wouldn't have said that 5 years ago or maybe 6 years ago. I personally don't believe there's any coincidences. I think everything is put in your path to give you a decision to go, right or to go left. I think for me personally, there were a lot of things and signs that I just was ignoring and not seeing. And so God, the universe, whatever it is that you believe in, I think he was like, this girl is not paying attention. So we're going to have to knock her over the head with something that she can't ignore. And it took a while. I mean, it was a process. I'm 9 years, almost 9 years from when this started. So didn't happen overnight. It was a lot of things that I changed and implemented and looked at differently. It was a gigantic process. But for me, the one thing that I've always thought was strange is from day one, I never thought this was going to take me out. And doctor after doctor after doctor would tell me, this is going to take you out sooner than later. And I would just sit there and I would just like, oh, really? That's so weird. And I can't explain that any other way than either I was just such in denial and that's how I coped, or I have an amazing intuition and I just did not have a feeling at that moment, at that time. I'm not saying that tomorrow it's not going to take me out, but in the beginning, I never had a fear.
And that was going to be my question, right? Was it Was it a denial, or was it just this like extreme confidence, like, nah, I'm going to win?
I couldn't tell you because I can't explain it. Now, was I afraid? Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I was afraid. Every scan, every surgery, there were just so many things that were coming at me. I had 7 back-to-back recurrences and 8 surgeries. It was just constant. Every time I'd get a CT scan, they'd say, oh, showed up here. Oh, it showed up there. So was I afraid? Yes. Was I afraid I was going to die in the next couple of months? No. But I have no explanation as to why I felt like that.
I have a question, and let's just jump down the road. We're learning a lot in the medical field about the connection to pain and disease, the mind-body connection to pain and disease, right? And we're starting to learn things like literally learn things like if we are in a super toxic environment and the world is nasty and doesn't make sense around us, we can do things and just develop sickness and disease. How much of the way you were living your life, if any, do you contribute to the cancer diagnosis, given this understanding of the mind-body connection to pain and disease?
100%. 100%. It was stress. It was resentment that I was carrying. It was not taking time to do things for myself. It wasn't not exercising. It wasn't what I was eating. I've never been overweight. I've always exercised. I believe there is no doubt I got cancer. I was running around constantly trying to do what my kids needed me to do. I was trying to work full time. I was the breadwinner. I was the person that dealt with the auditor that put me through a 3-year IRS audit. It was just constant. My mom died a year and a half before I was diagnosed. It was just all of these things that I was like, shit, got to take care of that. Can't really process it because I got something, coming up right behind me. So I totally believe that's why I got cancer.
Then, Romy, what's your advice to people who may be sitting on a fresh cancer diagnosis? And what do you say to them in the space of, well, hey, listen, you got to do what the doctors are telling you to do. But I also might encourage you to look at things like anger, resentment, how busy am I? Those types of things.
So I think when you're newly diagnosed, I think that you need to take some time and just freak out. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to think that right away you're going to go into self-help mode and try and, eliminate all these stressors. But I think at some point you have to develop a plan with your doctors and with yourself to say, if in 6 months from now, I am at the end of the road, what are those things in life that I might regret, or what am I holding on to? And figure out a way to start processing some of those things that maybe I didn't even know they were there. Honestly, I didn't, as I was living through it. And I was really involved in our colon cancer support group in the early years. And what I noticed is the people that dwelled on the cancer and the woe is me and why did this happen to me and just couldn't get past the anger are the ones that fared worse. And I really hope that to anyone that is listening to this podcast and maybe is in this situation, that's not everybody. It's not universal. It's my small, observation. And there's another subset of people that are trying to just make the best of what is in front of them. And so I think you just have to find a way to still live through it. Like, so I remember, so I said my son was a competitive hockey player, and his junior year of high school, we had agreed to billet one of the teammates that is from Seattle, but was here playing hockey.
I should hit the pause button for folks who don't play hockey. They have no idea what this means, but billeting basically means you take somebody who probably lives in another country or another state, and they come to live with you, and then literally they live under your roof, they eat all of your food, and you take them to every hockey practice and game.
That is exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is.
So I said yes to this when I thought I was stage 2 and, everything was going to be dandy. And it just so happened that I wasn't going to backtrack and say no. So now I have another child living in my house as I was going through chemo. And my mindset was just keep doing what you would normally do. This is just a roadblock. Just keep doing what you'd normally do and just see what happens. So that was my strategy.
So let's bring the psychologist into play because, okay, let's assume somebody now has heard for the very first time, like, oh my God, I didn't realize that my illness could be connected to something bigger than, well, I just have some cancer cells and I need to, shoot them with chemotherapy and try to erase the whole thing. And they go, I kind of want to work on some things. I want to set down some of this stuff. Maybe I want to work on resentment. Maybe I want to work on forgiveness. What's a good path to or first place to start, Dr. Frank?
It's going to be a little different for everybody. I think there are some people who might be able to immediately turn to some of their inner circle people and start having some of those conversations. And maybe for the first time hear some feedback kind of outside looking in, because the people who are closest to us tend to see stuff in ourselves before we see things in ourselves. For some people, jumping right into, sitting down with a counselor or therapist, like that's going to work better because maybe we don't want to lay all of that on, some of our family or friends. But yeah, the hardest thing is to recognize that, like, something that you've been doing intentionally or unintentionally, in some small or large way contributed to where you're at right now. And you kind of have to accept that or be open to that part first before you can have any of these conversations. Because otherwise, if you see cancer in this instance as this thing that is totally random and it happened to me totally randomly, there's nothing I could have done differently. There's nothing I can do differently. Then you're not going to ask those questions. You're not going to make changes because there's no control that you have.
What's interesting about Romy's story is that she was one of those people. I don't think you knew this about yourself up front, but you were telling me a story yesterday that you went in to try to buy some weed, or you had a doctor and you were like, I can't sleep. Can you give me a medical card so I can go buy some dope and like just freaking fall asleep? Yeah. And what was his answer to you?
He was dead serious. And he said, I think you need to go see a psychologist. And I just busted out laughing because I didn't know if he was being serious or not. I was like, I'm telling you, I can't sleep. And your response is you have to go see a psychologist. And then in my head, really quickly, I was like, oh, he thinks I'm totally in denial and I'm not dealing with this. He thinks I'm acting way too normal. And that's why he was just waiting for the moment to tell me you need to go see a psychologist. And oh my gosh, I did. And Beth totally changed my life. And I think that so this was at Mayo Clinic. And Mayo Clinic has psychologists. So she was very used to working with patients with chronic illnesses and cancer. And so my only suggestion would be that if somebody is in my situation, seek out somebody that has experience working with cancer patients, or somebody that has chronic pain, or somebody that has experience with diseases.
What's maybe one thing that you've learned from Beth in all of those years of talking to her?
Well, I'll tell you the thing that completely changed my life, and it's so incredibly simple that I'm almost embarrassed to say it. She said, there are 3 ways that we get emotions out. You can sweat, you can cry, or you can speak. And I looked at her and I was like, cry? Oh, that's not going to work. That's really icky and uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, sweat. Okay, I can sweat, but I don't know if I can sweat out my cancer. And when she said your words, she like used the hand motion, like up and out. And I was like, oh, that's what I don't do. That's what I don't do. I'm the middle child. I'm the peacemaker. I'm not going to say out loud a lot of things that I'm thinking because I just want everyone to be happy. So I had to start using my words. And that was really hard.
Because at the end of the day, what you have figured out that other people need to latch onto is that in order for you to be happy, you needed to get this stuff off your chest. This stuff needed to leave your body in some way, right?
It did. Yes.
So you had to come to a crossroads where you said, do I continue to make everybody else in my life happy, or do I make myself happy? And do I do what I finally need to do for me? And it sounds like choice B was a very good one. And I'm going to guess if I were going to sit down with your 3 children, not only would they maybe disagree with the profoundness in which this has impacted their lives, but I might suggest that they would say something to the effect of, my mom showed me what it was like to be really courageous and really brave. And what I mean by that is she did start talking it out. She did start to figure out that she was holding on to some things. She did start to understand the impact of her mom's passing and all of those little hits along the way. I think that's a really beautiful way for our kids to see us, because then we teach them how to handle these difficult moments later in their life, should they ever come to, that same crossroads. So do you disagree with that assessment of how your kids might explain you in that time?
No, I completely agree. I really do. And I was always really open with my kids. If they asked me a question and it wasn't age appropriate, I found a way to say the truth in an age appropriate way. So my kids, I was really good at being very open with them. It was other people, but I think if you were to ask them now and go back on it, yes, I think they would see it. And they really, when their dad and I got divorced, it was totally amicable. Like the kids today, because I had that experience of working to use my words, that by the time all of that happened, my kids they were like, we just want everyone to be happy. Like we were just so open and honest. This is what's happening. This is how we're going to move forward. And this is why. And everyone was fine.
Frank, anything from you? I've got a question I can't wait to ask. So go ahead if you got something.
Just like, it's amazing all the times that we talk to folks, like the things that got them through. There is going to be some kind of innate personality trait or characteristic in it, but a lot of the things that we end up talking about, caught that. A lot of the things that we end up talking about are skills, are things that we learn or can learn along the way. And it sounds like in your case, you learned some skills early on that carried you through, and then you learn new ones later. But I think a lot of times people are just like, oh, well, I'm not good at X, Y, or Z. And they don't realize that it's something that they can learn and practice and get better at. And most of the time, it is something that you can learn and practice and get better at.
I want to make a comment to that because I think that is so true. I struggled with being vulnerable, like really struggled. I was like, no, I can't let the outer world know that, I'm falling apart. And so my therapist would actually give me homework. And she was like, you need to, and it would be one little thing. So when I talk about this, like this was a multi-year process. This by no means happened overnight. And it was really hard. And she was like, you have to practice saying this to your ex-husband. I was like, I can't do that. That just sounds rude. I can't say that. And she was like, no, you need to practice it and we'll talk about it next week. So it was like she was forcing me to do these things. And then it just started clicking.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a mistake that some of this cancer stuff started to slow or die down as you were finding your voice and working through things?
No, if you would graph out the time period, if you would look at it on a graph, I've never done this, but I think I should. If you were to look on a graph as to what happened, when it happened versus what I was doing, there is a huge direct correlation.
I believe it. The question that I was dying to ask you, and I should let our audience know that I'm very aware of one of Romy's closest friends in her life, and she's a woman that we've had on the podcast here a number of times, and Jill McMahon. And so I know Jill. Jill loves to talk. Jill's very excellent at communication. How important were your friends during this whole time? Because they're always important, but boy, do they ramp up during a situation like this. So what impact does friendship have on you in your life?
So it was hugely important to me. And what I chose to do was just take a couple of my really close friends, and they were the ones that I processed with. And Jill was one of them. And Jill and I used to run every single Tuesday, and I think we did something else on a different day of the week. And so we would spend
cocaine or riding horses or going to the mall.
It was always something exercise related, like hiking. So I said, we used to run RUN every Tuesday. And we did this when I was sick still. And that was, I would process a ton with her. And then I had another girlfriend and we hiked all the time. And her ex-husband died of cancer. And so we would talk. And, there were just a couple of people that I felt really comfortable just being really raw with. Outside of my sister was just a huge support system. So yes, they were very important. Jill was hugely instrumental. She walked the whole path with me from, I'm not cured. I am always going to be a stage 4 colon cancer person until I die of something else. Like, it's not like I can let my foot off the gas pedal.
Yeah, that's how my friend kind of describes it. He's just like, God, even when it's not here, it's here. And
yeah, it's always there.
Always with you. Frank, I want you to talk about, having those people in our lives that we can be super vulnerable with. And what I mean by that is not always, just telling them how sad we are, but part of the confidence of a great friend is allowing them to see like the ugliest parts of you, the parts that you're not the most proud of, that you never want to look in the mirror and see. But, really good friends, they can create a time and a space for you to show that side, which is probably pretty important, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I've discovered, I would say I have multiple best friends. But they're kind of all best friends in slightly different ways. Mm-hmm. There are some that like I can tell absolutely, and the most embarrassing thing that could happen to me that I wouldn't want to tell anybody or my doctor, right? But like I can tell that friend. When I need to like process some stuff, there's a go-to friend. When I have to do something that might be questionably legal, right? There's a friend that I will call because he will do it and ask questions later, right?
Yeah.
And so to try to find one person who can necessarily be all of those things for you would probably be really, really hard, right? Because while we're robbing the bank, I don't want to process my feelings, right? Like we're just trying to get out of there. So having different friends who kind of serve those different roles, but it's important, I think, to have at least like one of each of those people.
Was that your inner circle, Romy?
It was. Yeah. Yeah. Because you have to have the friend that is just going to say, let's just go to the bar and get drunk. And I don't want to know any of the really deep, dark, and ugly stuff. And then you have to have the other friend that you can just totally process the scary stuff. And absolutely. So,
as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I think what would be useful is to address some of those people that you mentioned up front. So you said 1 and 2 are going to experience a cancer diagnosis at some point. And so let's talk to somebody who's fresh, who's new in it, and they're now like they're down that rabbit hole of I'm Googling all the time, I'm listening to every podcast that I can about cancer. Mm-hmm. Give me a good strategy for somebody like that to like, here's a good checklist of things I think you should think about.
Okay, so I think that's the hardest question that you've asked me in the last 50 minutes. And the reason I say that is I look at cancer like a total umbrella disease, like a virus. And it just then presents itself so differently in each person. And so I don't think any two people are alike. I don't think a one size solution is going to work for any two people. I think it's very individualized. And I think that's why cancer is so difficult. I think that's why we don't have a cure, because my cancer is always going to be different than yours because my body makeup is different than yours. So, that's kind of the disclaimer. But I think that in general, everybody needs to be their own advocate. That you have to question your doctors. You have to find a doctor that's going to be your partner, that you're going to say, hey, I read this. What do you think? Or I heard this. Can we just try this? And you need a partner and somebody that's willing to listen to you. And that would really be my advice. Just find a team of people that believe in you. At the 5 year, I remember my doctors in San Diego, I said to them, I need 5 years. I don't care what you have to do. My youngest will graduate from high school in 5 years. And then anything after that is just icing on the cake. And at the 5 year mark, I wrote them a letter and I said, my strategy was to surround myself with people that believed I could do this. Because anyone that, like the very first oncologist, I fired him right from the get-go. And anyone that's like, do you want to know what your expiration date is? I was not going to develop a relationship with you. So I just surrounded myself with people that believed I could do it. And, whether it was all smoke and mirrors or not, it didn't matter. It just gave me confidence that, you know what? There's a chance.
Closing remarks from you, Frank, as we kind of wind down this episode to learn from people who lived it.
I wanted to squeeze one more drop of advice out of Romy, if we could. Because I think there's something that a lot of people who might be listening to this could have in common. And they're probably a lot like that person that you described before you ever got your cancer diagnosis. That person who's running around doing everything for the kids. They're trying to work full time. They're trying to be everything to everybody. And even though you may have been taking care of yourself physically and exercising and eating, not Chick-fil-A, although Chick-fil-A is delicious, not eating that every single day, right? And so there are people out there who may have heard you describe that before. and may have been like, ooh, that kind of sounds like me. And the outcome of that is not always cancer, but it's usually not something great. So for that person who a half hour ago heard you describe that person that you were, what do you say to that person right now who hasn't had some terrible thing slapped on the desk in front of them yet, but for the first time may have heard, maybe what I'm doing isn't great?
So I host internships through my nonprofit for U of A, and I've done it for 3 years. And I have a group right now of 6 college kids. And we did this session that was 25 things I wish I knew when I was 25. And I did it originally for my kids, and I wrote it out. And I think I did it after a day that somebody just couldn't seem to find the garbage can. And I was like, they clearly, need some tips. And so that I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this for the interns. I'm just going to grab some of the highlights. And I said, if you just the one thing out of this entire list that is going to benefit you for the rest of your life is you have to make yourself happy. However that is, you've got to take time to have a hobby or do something that's just for you that feeds your soul, because work and kids and a spouse can easily suck you under. And every single day, do something that feeds your soul, whether it's 20 minutes or an hour. You have to prioritize it. And so that would be my advice that I would say is, if you get to the end of the day and you look back on your day and there was not one thing that just really jazzed you, then you need to do something that jazzes you.
I say it all the time. Putting yourself first isn't selfish. It's the only way we ever get the best version of you.
Being selfish and being self-absorbed are 2 totally different things. And I think you have to be selfish or you're not making anyone happy.
Dr. Frank, thank you so much for your time and expertise. As always, I appreciate you, my friend.
It was fun.
Yeah. And Romy, thank you so much for everything that you offered up today too. I'm so blown away at your story. I see why Jill likes to be around you all the time. And I really know in my heart that some of what you've said today is going to impact somebody so much so that they actually take a step towards making their life right. And if we just do that little thing for somebody, I think that, we've done a good job. So thank you very much for being on our podcast and sharing your tune.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
What's come up for me is realizing how much it's affected my habits, my operating systems, and my relationships. And it's been very challenging to unpack all of that and realize that, but also having grace with myself of knowing that healing's not linear and that there's lots of different ways that can happen. That's why I was inspired, and when we wanted to collaborate, that was really hit home for me.
October 14th, that's when we will gather together and present our first Relief from Grief event with Teresa Porter, with Jill McMahon, who's been on this podcast several times, with Rob, who is a specialist in equine therapy, especially in the modalities of anxiety. And I cannot wait for this 7.5-hour retreat up in Scottsdale. We are, as I can kind of explain it to everybody, it's like When you experience grief, it can feel overwhelming, like a really heavy blanket on top of you. And what we want to do in that special 7.5 hours with you up in Scottsdale is let air out of your tires. Create some space for something new to start happening to and for you in your life. And we've got a great program, I think that's the right word for it, of things that we're going to do with you. We're going to start with some movement and some mindfulness, and then we're going to experience the equine therapy together, and then I'm going to lead this incredible ceremony at the river, and then we're going to come back and just have a beautiful dinner, and if the rules are right, we're going to have a nice campfire. And it should just be a really cool, meaningful day where you are able to set some things down and then jump into the next phase, the next season of your life, and feel new, feel refreshed, feel like you've got some tools to hit this thing the next time that it comes for you. So anyways, October 14th, Scottsdale. You can sign up right now. The easiest thing is to just hit learnfrompeoplewholiveit.com, or you can go to sereneyoga.com, and all the details, the waivers, the how to pay, all the goodness is right there. Look forward to seeing you if indeed this speaks to you. And if it doesn't speak to you, maybe it speaks to somebody that you know in your life, and just do your best to make sure that they know about it. And so if they want to experience it, they have the opportunity to. Cool. Guys, have a great week. Thank you so much for listening all the time, and we will see you next week on Learn from People Who Lived It.